Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Destination the Show. This is episode 99. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Hello, good sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Relaxed, calm around my house. Kids take care of themselves. They
Sounds nice.
drive. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Um, for maybe the first time in the history of this podcast, which is now 2+ years, news has broken at a convenient time for us. So all is well. I'm grateful. This is also episode 99, except you know what? This is actually our 100th episode, technically. But
Because
it's
the
episode
Twins, the draft extravaganza didn't get a.
the trade deadline extravaganza where
Yeah,
Brock and Uncle John were cussing and
Yeah, that was a Twins Daily collaborative effort. So even our friends at Twins Off Daily, or enemies, however you want to frame them, didn't even get an official episode for that one. So
okay.
we're going to go with 99 and a half.
it's 99. 99.
Okay. 99 is fine. Next week is 100. That's very exciting. Let's start with some housekeeping, and then we'll get into all of the things. And all of the things is really just one thing. Ways that you can support the show. You can like and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform of choice. Bonus points if you leave us a 5-star review. You can find all of our stuff on YouTube. The handle there is at Destination the Show. On Twitter at DTS_pod1 as the Blue Jays take a 5-1 lead over the Dodgers. On Blue Sky, the handle is at Destination the Show, or you can shoot us an email, destinationtheshow@gmail.com. Derek Shelton has been hired as the brand new manager of the Minnesota Twins. News broke this evening. We were coming into this episode about to have a conversation about the 4 remaining candidates, one of whom was Shelton, Scott Service, James Rowson, and Ryan Flaherty. But Shelton is the choice. So we're going to spend a good amount of time on this today because it's the first significant piece of Twins offseason news. Let's start big picture reaction to the Shelton hire. What do you think?
Yeah. So Shelton was originally a Paul Molitor bench coach. Believe that he came in under Falvey at the end of the Molitor time. Was a holdover for Baldelli, and him and Baldelli seem to have a really good relationship, which I think is unique. And that then you hire him to replace him, right? But I think big picture, he's going to be different than Rocco, and I personally I'm a fan of that. To me, Derek Shelton is more of fiery, less of a philosopher type dude, and the players loved him when he was in Minnesota before. Not a lot of guys, I don't think, besides Buxton, are still on the team from
I think
then,
that's the only one, actually.
which is the most important one.
For sure.
But I do think if you have that sort of thing, when he left, deservingly got a managerial job, that was a big deal. I think to the Twins and their success. So despite having not a lot of luck with a franchise that's, aside from having one really good pitcher, historically awful, I don't think that's necessarily a fair shake for Shelton. And so getting someone that I think will do a lot of the things differently, as far as motivating, as far as managing a group of professional athletes. I'm a fan of it because there is some unknown, right? How's he going to manage this group? Mm-hmm. But also he's got a track record of having done it before. So anytime you can learn anything and then come into a new job with various experience, I think that's a benefit for the Twins and for Derek Shelton. So really curious how the rest of the staff comes together, because I think that's just as important. And it might be a while before we get any of that information, but I think the bench coach, the hitting coach, does the does Mackey return? I think all of those are just as big of question marks as who's the next manager going to be and how's he going to manage. So I don't think I would give this like an AA plus or maybe even a B plus, but I would give it a B immediately for hiring, because it is getting someone back that is familiar with the GM, which I think is important, familiar with the area, familiar with the fans, and familiar to the most important player on the major league team.
Okay, so many things I want to disagree with you about. It's hard to know where to start. What you're like, bring it on. Hope you're in the mood for a fight. Let's talk. I want to talk about the familia. I'm writing down things that you're saying that have annoyed me already, so that we can make sure that we come back to them and just like have a chance to talk through them. So I always appreciate a different perspective. I think the first, like, I don't know, like counterpoint or wondering I have is around your like claim that Shelton is going to operate differently from Rocco. Now, a couple of caveats I think are worthwhile before we get into this discussion. Like, right, we're not privy to the hiring process. There's so much we don't know about it. I don't think they're going to manage in particularly different ways. Because of the point that you made about familiarity. Here is a quote that I want to read you from Derek Shelton's introductory like press conference with the Pirates, and just to get your reaction to whether you feel like this kind of aligns with Baldelli's approach as a manager, or whether you see any difference here. And I'm sure you have, kind of other counterpoints that are contrary to this. So this is when Derek Shelton was introduced by Ben Cherington. Shelton immediately talked about building a, quote, player-centered culture. Continuing the quote here, it's going to be a culture that's built on relationships and built on communication. We're going to build a coaching staff that's going to have that at the forefront of their minds, Shelton said shortly after taking a seat at the elevated table in PNC Park's press conference room. Do you not think, Jeremy, that is much more aligned and akin to Rocco's approach than differing from it?
Do we agree that Rocco was a great communicator?
I think we can come back to the communication part for sure, because that is and has been called out as a notable strength of Shelton's.
And I think that was, given the events leading up to the trade deadline, that was not a strength of Rocco.
So there's so much to unpack here. So one of my wonderings is, right, like, how do we parse the overall communication of the organization and the front office from the communication of the manager? And I think even someone with great communication skills, those can be compromised when you're put in stressful situations like the Twins constantly losing, right? And so Shelton has been called out as a great communicator. I guess I was alluding more to like the player-centered culture. That seems to be the Rocco like mold or approach to me, staying fairly even keeled publicly, taking players up on the opportunity to talk through decisions, whether they agreed or were frustrated by them. That's like a very Rocco Baldelli approach. And this is what I'm assuming that he means by kind of a player-centered approach. But I welcome disagreement if you have it.
Well, yeah, and I'm not. I guess for me, it's like just their demeanor is not the same.
Sure.
And so the conversations that come as a result of being a player-centered approach. Does anybody ever feel like Rocco, behind closed doors, got super fiery, or did any? I mean, he was just like, like your.
I do.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's like decently well known that he would like not run his mouth, but like use more colorful language when like behind closed doors, and was like very guarded in how he interacted with the media in a way that maybe he wasn't when he was more player facing.
Theo, hit me on your TV.
Yeah, I definitely need to do that because I'm watching the World Series here in the background. I will say, as someone who's been in the room when he's been off the record, he definitely does have that colorful side, and he's more willing to just speak honestly and candidly. Now, granted, when it's with us writers, he will also reiterate every 5 sentences, "Please don't write this,"
Right.
because
Which
that's
is fine. But
I honestly just knowing how he is with us when he's off the record in the writer's side of things, I think there's definitely more of that colorful side that comes out. I think he just knew the right situations of like how to say what to which guy when he needed to be that, use the colorful language, be a little more loose, but also be direct with them and just be like, you're not doing this right. We need more from you, as an example.
Which I think any example of any manager, any coach, anybody in that position has a way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that Shelton leads, the way that Rocco leads is just going to be different. I think that's why they had success together, because it was Shelton that was texting the team, when they were going to be late, and how, the LAF text, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a well-known thing. Like that's just, there's going to be similarities, but I do think that there's going to be enough differences that it's not going to feel like the same old thing from that perspective. Now, you could certainly make the argument that if it's Felby making calls, what really difference does it make? And I think that's going to be the frustration with anybody, because Derek Felby's still pulling the strings, and he says, I'm responsible for it, when he fires the manager.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so he replaces him with someone that is familiar to the situation and how things go. And obviously he was a candidate at the end when Rocco got hired. And then you hired him as the bench coach.
Yeah.
And then he got a managerial job. So he was a strong, assistant coach. And Pittsburgh is just, I don't think it's a fair shake, because Pittsburgh is going to finish low in the standings regardless of who their manager was.
Yeah.
And Shelton was just kind of scapegoat. They kind of turned around after that. But I'm at least willing to go into this with okay, let's see, because he's going to have a different approach to spring training. He's going to have a different approach to getting ready. He's going to have a different approach, at a minimum, because he's going to know how Rocco did it and say, well, it's going to have to be different.
No more Ektos.
Well, let me pose this question to you guys. So obviously he managed with one of the best pitchers in the game of baseball the last couple of seasons, but I think it's fair to say the Twins have a better balance of talent than the Pirates had. So do you think with how the Twins roster as is right now, you could get more out of Derek Shelton as a manager with how this roster as is with the Twins compared to what he was able to work with the Pirates?
Don't you think
and then he leaves. I feel like that's a really hard question to answer, and it's such a cop-out to say so, right? But there's so many things that need to shake out before answering that, and it really depends on, like, what is the payroll number, how much turnover in this roster is there, pardon me, before spring of 2026? Because if the Twins are largely running back the same group next year, no one's going to be excited for Twins baseball based on how that went. Right. And so it really is. Go ahead. Sorry, Jeremy.
He's not getting this job for 1 year and then getting fired.
No, this isn't a Ray Miller situation before Tom Kelly took over.
So here's my counter question then. How much does this managerial hire even matter? And here's why I'm asking that, right? Because I've seen reactions on social media to this hire that are, most of them range, I think, from this is uninspiring to like the kind of typical Twitter, like faux outrage of like, are you kidding me? Like, does this hire matter? Because if the Twins are at the talent deficit they've been at in 2025 for the next 2 years, they're not going to win regardless of who the manager is, whether that's Derek Shelton, James Rowson, a young, hip, up and comer like Craig Albanese, who was just hired by the Orioles. So how much influence is he going to have at all, do we think?
I mean, I think it would be insane to say it doesn't matter at all. In 2025 or in 2026, I don't think it's going to matter a huge amount. I mean, you could hire the greatest manager ever, and if, like you said, there's a talent deficit, you're not going to win a ton of games. I do think that having a new voice is always going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And now whether that's 3 games different or 5 games different or 11 games different, I do think that's an important thing. So, yeah, I mean, there's just too many, like you said, there's too many gaps to fill. What does this team even look like? What kind of relationship do Shelton and Felvey have? Like, is this I want this type of player? Was it Rocco that was the guy that was like, let's get guys with positional flexibility and worry about where they go defensively? Was that a Rocco thing or was that a Felvey thing? Like, we don't know that, right? Right?
No.
We don't know that, but I have strong suspicions that most of the things are Falvey things.
Mm-hmm.
But if him and Rocco align on all of that, there might as well be a Rocco thing too. Like,
Right.
what is Shelton really going to be pushing for? Like, what are his core beliefs?
So
And
that's a great question, and we should kind of pivot there next, because one thing Shelton does have is a strong, incredible hitting background. Now, we can laugh this off with like the performance of the Pirates in recent years, right? But he was also the Rays hitting coach at one point. He's a well thought of hitting guy in baseball. Here's
he was
my
also
question.
with Cleveland from 2005 to 2009 as their hitting coach, and that's prime Grady Sizemore era. That's Travis Hafner going off as a DH, hitting 40 home runs, and there's a good track record of a lot of players he was hitting coach for in that decade plus span. And obviously the Pirates being who they are, that's different. But again, we got Buxton, we got up and comers in Walker Jenkins, Emmanuel Rodriguez, Luke Keeschel. I would still consider an up and comer because of his limited playing time. So there's a track record there that could definitely help back up these kids who have high ceilings for themselves that are just breaking into the majors that maybe Shelton can get more out of than Baldelli may have.
Mm-hmm. And I wanna touch on the prospect piece too, because I mean what you said is spot on, Theo. Like, that really does matter. If the Twins don't develop their talent internally, they're not going to turn around from being very mediocre to bad to good anytime soon. I guess my question is another one for you, Jeremy, of like, you brought up the word familiarity as a positive. And I think I would like push back there and say, why should we prioritize familiarity? Because what's familiar has not worked, right? I think you could make a compelling case that the Twins have over prioritized familiarity organizationally in recent years, whether that is a lack of staff turnover, a lack of change of approach, offensively, a lack of turnover on the roster. And so to me, when you say he's familiar, that's a good thing. My instinct is to say, like, is it? Like, should we question that more if familiarity is good? And I think perhaps, and you can disagree with this, a lot of the general like malaise and pushback around this hire is probably because it's not somebody new, a truly like different voice, someone from kind of outside the organization. This feels to people like the Twins are taking a step back and making an easy, convenient hire over what might be best for the organization. And of course, there's no way for us lay people to know that, but I think that's maybe how people are digesting it. So curious for your take on the familiarity piece.
Yeah, and I guess my view is more like when you come into when you were in a franchise that didn't operate as a big market franchise, like familiar with how that works. You go to Pittsburgh, who's kind of the same, and then you come back, or you come into this situation where you're going to know Like, you're never going to have the expectation that your GM is going to spend $200 million. Your owner's going to spend $200 million. Like, you know how ownership works here. You know as well as anybody the frustrations that this fan base has had with ownership, right? And so I think understanding kind of I don't like to use the word culture, but I think that's the best way to kind of describe, like, it's not going to be a situation where he's coming in and it's like, oh, I've never done this before, right? And I think there's value in that. How player development works, there's still a lot of the decision makers are the same as when he left, right? So having prior relationships with people in all of those positions, to me, that's the positive. Like, you come in and you have an idea of who does what things well and who's done what, and I think it's the networking thing, right? You go to Pittsburgh, you see what did or didn't work, you come back and you say, here are some things that I would like to do or not do in a situation that you're familiar with, more so than if he didn't know this area. I think that's a big difference. And so I understand entirely what you're saying. Like, bring in fresh blood, bring in someone that's only got experience somewhere else. Yeah, there's certainly value in that, but knowing exactly how this organization works and how ownership works and being familiar with all of that, I think is a benefit, or at least a check on the right side of the box for him, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Let me pivot this direction and ask you a different question then. Is Derek Shelton walking into the same situation in Minnesota in 2026 that he walked into in Pittsburgh? To put that differently, is he a placeholder, right? Is Derek Shelton simply stewarding a franchise lacking in talent at the big league level currently until enough of their prospects in the mid to upper minors are ready, only to be replaced by someone fresh, outside perspective, etc.? Like, is he, it's hard to, other than the pre-existing relationships that you alluded to, the ties, the roots in the organization, it's hard to see, other than the fact that, of course, we know, like, these jobs there's only 30 of them. Tons of people would kill for the opportunity. It's hard to see him looking at the situation and saying, yeah, like, we're going to compete. We're ready to win here. Like, we're knocking on the door of the playoffs next year. That doesn't feel like the place the org is at. And there's a lot of time between now and spring for that to change potentially. But does it feel like Shelton's walking into a similar lame duckish type situation that Rocco found himself in the beginning of this year?
Yes, but also, don't most hires feel like that? Like, throughout all the sports, your shelf life is going to be not very long if you don't win. And in the event that you do win, you buy yourself extra years. Like, I would say, like Pat Murphy getting hired by the Brewers, that felt like, okay, Council leaves, the Brewers kind of rebuild or start the rebuild. That's almost like a lame duck situation. And then he wins, and now it's like, oh, okay. And I feel like that's kind of the case with every program, with every you're walking into a situation, unless you're a legend replacing someone that retires at the top of their game, even then, right? It feels like that. And so that to me is where it's like, if he comes in and turn this thing around, which you see in baseball quite often, you're gonna be like, man, he was great, until he loses in 2 years and he gets fired anyway, right? That's how managing and coaching works. Like, look at the NBA, like the guy that, I don't know if it was coach of the year or the finals, whatever it was, like, they all got fired within 3 years of that happening because it's the roller coaster. You can't fire the whole team. The Twins tried it at the deadline. You can fire the manager, and that's what happens. The Bucks win the title. Bud gets fired 2 years later. Like that's just how coaching in professional sports works, and in college sports now too. You see it all the time, and so I would say simply, yeah, it's just like he walked into in Pittsburgh. He got his 4.5 years or whatever it was. It didn't go great. Boom, he's fired. Rocco got his handful of years. It didn't go great. Boom, he's fired. Look around the league. That's just kind of the case. And I think the Twins probably have more patience than most organizations.
For sure.
And that's why you look at that and say, well, why would he take the job if they're not going to spend money and they're not going to be competitive? Well, because he's going to get probably 1.5 years longer with the Twins than he would get with any other franchise. So I do think that, yeah, it's kind of that situation. But how many great baseball openings were there this year?
I would argue that most openings were more appealing than the Twins opening.
Okay.
With the exception of the Rockies, I would say the Rockies are worse. I would say the Orioles is more appealing in terms of caliber of talent available to you. I would say the Nationals is more appealing, not necessarily because of caliber of talent available to you, but resources that are going to be put behind that team are significantly more than the Twins. So that excites me a lot. Padres is more appealing than the Twins by far, looking at the Major League roster. You're shedding dead weight Luis Ariz this year, so that's good. I'm struggling to remember the rest of the vacancies, but
now the Angels.
Okay, but well, that's never more appealing than anything.
But I think the thing is, when you say all those and then you tell me why they're more appealing, what you're also saying is there's going to be less patience to not win, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of that, like in the grand scheme of all of it, makes those jobs less appealing, right? In any walk of life where it's like this, if I take a job knowing that I got 1 year to turn it around or I'm gone, I might be like, you know what? Why don't I go to the place where I can get 3 years to turn it around and really kind of get my stuff going? Because by the time I get in and start doing things, the first year's over, right? And so I do think that's kind of what weighs on the Shelton side. And again, can he bring some of these guys back to Minnesota that Minnesota lost when they were successful? Because I think that would be another thing where it's like, James Rosen was a runner-up, but now he wants to come back as the bench coach. Like, if that happens, that to me is a win when you're just getting 2 guys back that you lost for better jobs. And so, you know what I mean? Like,
I do.
There's reasons that to like this, and there's reasons to not like it. And I think it's going to be hard to make a full decision before we know all of the other parts that need to be filled in.
So 2 more quick things on Shelton, then we'll talk about something else minor league related before we wrap it up today. Theo touched on this in a question around like young players, right? And young players are going to be critical to the Twins' success or not. Like if Luke Keeschel is not a good major league hitter, if Kalen Culpepper does not make it to the major leagues, if Walker Jenkins is a bust, none of this is going to matter anyway. So you've mentioned a couple of times, Jeremy, like I don't blame Shelton for the record in Pittsburgh. Totally agree. Totally get that. I would strongly encourage nobody to go and look up what the offensive record was in Pittsburgh, even though Shelton has a background as hitting coach. It's not exciting. Does Shelton deserve credit for the development of young players at the MLB level in Pittsburgh, right? And so obviously not a hitter, but Paul Skeens showed up in Pittsburgh and is a top 3 pitcher on the planet. There's guys like Brian Reynolds or O'Neal Cruz. Brian Reynolds not a young guy, but O'Neal Cruz, like these are guys who have performed well under Shelton. And so while we're not holding him accountable necessarily for the overall talent deficit in Pittsburgh, do you give him credit for any positive developments in young players under his kind of stewardship while he was manager of the Pirates?
I'd say Reynolds is like the go-to example because he's had both his all-star appearances, as well as Shelton was the manager there. I mean, he's become a 20 home run on average hitter while Shelton was there. I think that's the easy example. But when you go beyond that, because I feel like O'Neal Cruz is a guy who, when he was a prospect, his ceiling was super high. And we look at what he's been able to do in the major leagues, and it's just not meeting that ceiling that was set for him. And he's been kind of just passable. He had to move from shortstop to center field because his defense was so spotty at shortstop. So it's such a harder example to pick at because just take David Popkins and what he's done with Toronto, for example, compared to what he's done with the Twins. You can do the same thing with Shelton with what he did in his tenure with both Cleveland and Tampa Bay. So, they're easier examples to pick out when they're the hitting coach full time, but when it's manager, you have so much more on your plate where you got maybe one or two examples right here where it's easy to say, yes, Shelton probably had some influence on Reynolds improving as a hitter when you look at his numbers from his rookie year and then the COVID shortened season to what he was able to do from 2021 to 2024. And then what happened after Shelton was fired this year.
Right on.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are the manager probably gets more credit than he deserves when something goes right, and more blame than he deserves when something doesn't go right. How many different people are involved in the development of Luke Keeschel between getting to AAA and maturing and hitting his prime? It's dozens and dozens and dozens, right? And that includes the managers at levels, the hitting coaches and managers, the instructors during spring training, the positional guys defensively, the guys in the clubhouse with you, right? Like, I think you talk about Pablo Lopez being a good leader, right? We've talked too much on the show about Carlos Correa's leadership, good or bad, right? And so when you have that title as manager, you just get more credit than you deserve, and you get more blame than you deserve, and that's entirely normal. I'm not going to say Paul Skeens is great because of Derek Shelton. That's crazy. Paul Skeens would have been great if he never listened to anybody and just Paul Skeens, right? And so I think that's kind of the sense of that. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you overall. It's really hard to parse. I do think that a manager plays a hand in a young player coming up and feeling the level of comfort required to perform well at the major league level right from the jump or getting there, right? The manager is going to have input there. The manager is going to, let's put it this way, to provide the conditions for the player to thrive, right? And we want to stay away from that word culture, but whether that's like a conversation after something goes wrong, whether that's it's emotional intelligence, I think, right? That helps players to thrive when they get up. And it's a manager's job to be, I think, the leader of the group of guys who is forming that connection with a player who's new to the big leagues. And so I do think managers should get some credit when a young player comes up and thrives, because he's been put in a position to do so, at least partially, by the kind of climate that the manager has set in the major league clubhouse. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and before you jumped on, Theo and I were talking. Theo's comment was, Buxton's on board. But if Buxton's on board, that's a huge deal. Mm-hmm. And I think what happens is that's the first guy that Shelton talks to, right? And it's also going to be the first player that other players talk to. Like, hey, tell us about him. And if his response is, a bunch of positive things, which I would anticipate it would be, like that is going to go maybe not a long ways, but bringing it into spring training, like guys are going to be excited. That first time that Derek Shelton calls them, guys are going to have an expectation that Buck kind of set for them. So I think there's still reasons to be optimistic when he's the manager, despite the fact that payroll is going to be down, expectations are going to be down. I do think that there's going to be stuff that just feels different, and maybe that's just being optimistic. But I like I said from the very beginning, I don't dislike this, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Speaking of things that will be different, I think one of the things I'm most excited about, Jeremy, here is like now we can move on to what I would consider the interesting stuff, which is getting clarity on payroll. What does the rest of the backroom staff look like? I want to quickly come back to that. What does the MLB roster look like next year is obviously going to determine, how do things go. Let's play a quick game before we talk about something else real quick and get out of here. I'm going to give you a guy on the staff. You're going to tell me just a yes or no answer. Are they going to be back on staff next year? I'm only going to play this game with 3 guys. Okay. Bench coach, Jace Tingler. Back or not?
No.
Okay. Hitting coach, Matt Borg-Schulte.
No.
Pitching coach, P. Mackey.
Yes.
Okay.
How would you have answered those questions?
I think probably the same. I think Borg-Schulte is the one that's hard for me just because he was only hired last year. I'm positive he got a multi-year contract.
Then I mean, if they're under contract, I can't see the Twins being like, see you later. But I would guess that and if they extended Rocco, maybe they extended everybody. Typically, it's going assistants kind of get the same length contract as the head guy.
Yep, I think so.
So, but yeah, I don't see Tingler. I just don't see that being a thing. And I do fully expect Pete Mackey to be back.
We shall see how it plays out in the coming weeks. I do want to transition, Jeremy, talk a little bit about, we have about 8, 9, 10 minutes left. Talk a little bit about this study that was published on Baseball America, and get some reactions to this, because this dovetails nicely into something we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, we had a long rambling conversation about like, is the Twins problem a development issue or is it a major league talent issue when it comes to offense and when it came to offense in 2025? And we got really stuck on that topic. Baseball America released a couple of organizational rankings in the past 2 weeks for what they call pitching plus and hit plus organizational rankings. And the quick overview here is they take a bunch of inputs on the hitting side and a bunch of inputs on the pitching side, and they bake everything together to spit out like a composite number for each organization. So on the hitting side, for example, they factor in things like contact rate, 90th percentile exit velocity, chase rate, barrel percentage, expected WOBA, all that type of stuff. Okay. If I told you blind to rank the Twins, and you probably see my notes, but if I told you blind to rank the Twins offensively out of all 30 major league clubs in terms of what their kind of composite overall offensive or hitting score, what would you guess? And what would you guess is higher, their performance in hitting or their performance in pitching?
Are we talking organizationally or
just? So organizationally 1 to 30, and I'll spoil it. Dodgers are number 1 for hitting.
Yeah. So organizationally, I would say top half. So I would say top half.
Okay.
But I would say minor league would be more like top 10, and major league would be more like 15 to 20.
Okay.
Right.
This is just minor leagues. Just minor leagues.
Oh, minor leagues, and I would say probably around the top 10.
Okay.
Would be my guess.
And which element of the game would you predict to be ranked higher for the Twins, pitching or hitting?
Probably pitching, but I would consider it to be a close race.
Okay, so let's roll through some of these findings and just get some quick reactions from you. So the Dodgers, perhaps unsurprisingly, were number 1 overall in Hit Plus in the BA Hit Plus rankings. The Minnesota Twins were 5th out of all 30 orgs. And I'm just going to roll through some of their rankings and things that I find to be interesting. You can tell me if any of these really stand out to you, either for positive or negative reasons. 24th out of 30 in swing decisions. Just made me think about Brooks Lee.
Yeah, it's not great.
7th in contact rate, 9th in end zone contact rate, 11th in 90th percentile exit velocity, 5th in barrel rate, and 7th in expected WOBA on contact. Any surprises either in their like overall ranking or any of those like rankings really stand out to you as interesting or like affirming what you've seen in 2025?
The thing that sticks out is that they're a bottom third team in deciding when to swing the bat, but all of those other numbers are really good.
Yep.
Like if you make terrible swing decisions, don't you think your contact rate would be low? Right? Your barrel rate would be low. Like that to me is a number that or an indicator.
And this is where, yeah, oh, absolutely. And this is where I got to wondering, like, how much are guys in the like Florida State League and the like DSL skewing that, right? Who have like 40% K rates and are just like swinging at everything. But I found that number to be interesting too, because we've talked, Jeremy, about guys they've taken who maybe are aggressive swingers who they think they can rein it in, and they've had success. Keishel was a really aggressive swinger when he was drafted. Kalen Culpepper was a really aggressive swinger when he was drafted. Both of those guys have dialed it back significantly and had success. I guess the overall ranking of 5th, super impressed, also makes me even more puzzled about the discrepancy between the performance of the minor league hitters and the major league hitters. Do not get it. Super lost there. Super lost.
Well, maybe Rocco just didn't have a very good way of getting those guys adjusted to the big league.
I mean, to me, like, it's hard not to draw a line to say that there's a talent deficit problem more than it is anything else, which I think is the direction I was potentially leaning in anyway. Okay, you predicted, Jeremy, Twins would be top 3rd when it came to pitching. I'll give you a couple of nuggets there too. So they were 12th overall out of 30 orgs in pitching plus. And some interesting rankings there just in terms of their pitch types. 12th best 4-seam fastballs, 27th best sinkers or 2-seam fastballs, 16th best at sliders, 16th best at sweepers, 11th best at curveballs, 26th best overall in ranking changeups. And a lot of, I think, what came out that was interesting is they ranked higher in velocity on a lot of their pitches than they did in like horizontal or vertical break. So clearly a strength in adding velo, maybe still work to do in developing really good shapes on secondary pitches. But any surprises there in terms of the pitching ranking? Maybe that's a little bit more in line with what we might have expected.
Yeah, well, I guess you get to the 12th, but then you have 27th, 16th, 16th, 26th. You don't even have a lot of numbers that are higher than 12.
Yeah.
Velocity and sliders, 9th and induced vertical break on 4-seam. Yeah, so I guess the thing is like, to me, pitching is different. And we talked about this, like, you go in and you're the one that initiates the play, right? And so it can be very much about development because it's like, this is what you're going to do. And that's harder to do as a hitter, right? You have to react to what the pitch is being thrown. So if you're like, I'm only going to work on hitting breaking balls away. Well, great. But if the pitcher doesn't throw breaking balls away, then you can't work on handling that. Where a pitcher can say, I'm going to focus on throwing my curveball in hitters counts, right? Like
Yep.
it's more of a developmental thing,
Yeah.
because you have control over it. So I think that could be why a number gets skewed negatively, because it's like we're not worried we're not worried so much about the results.
Yep.
We're worried about you doing this. But yeah, those numbers are certainly bigger or not as good as I would have expected if you just would have said, tell me where you think they rank in these things.
Yep. Hey, well, we've got Riley Quick and Matt Barr and James Ellwanger coming to pitch in the lower levels next year. All right, we're gonna push pause there. I think for today, slightly shorter episode than normal. We will come back to really, really awesome questions that folks ask next week. I have held on to all of those. We will carry them forwards into a little mini mailbag. I've also feel like I've been teasing Justin LeBron and Liam Peterson for maybe 4 weeks at this point, so we will dig into them. We are about 6 weeks out from the draft lottery, dude.
Crazy.
I have run several more hundred simulations since we last spoke. We'll talk about that next time. Thank you guys for checking out the show and having us dig in on Derek Shelton. Excited to catch up with you guys next week. Until then, go Wolves. Naz Reed.